The mission of the unit was basically, if the Russians attacked, we were to do everything we could to sabotage the forward movement. But we were in Berlin, so surrounding us, the East German army was probably about 800,000 troops. And then you have the Soviet forces, Germany, which was about 1 million, surrounded by about 2 million East German and Russian soldiers. Well, some people call it the outpost of freedom because we're so far forward. Other people called it potentially the world's largest POW camp.
Welcome to Combat Story. I'm AJ Pasciuti, a retired Marine, Force Recon, Scout Sniper, and Marine Gunner with 21 years of service, multiple combat tours, and a lifetime of lessons learned in the arena itself. On this show, I sit down with warriors from every front line to uncover what combat truly feels like and how it shapes the way we see life, each other, and ourselves. This is Combat Story.
Today on Combat Story, I'm joined by James Stejskal, a former U.S. Army Green Beret who served with Special Forces Berlin, Detachment A, in the heart of the Cold War, and later went on to serve as a CIA case officer overseas. James is also a military historian and novelist whose work lives at the intersection of special operations, espionage tradecraft, and the human cost of secret wars. In this episode, we talk about what it means to train for behind-the-lines sabotage in a divided Berlin, how that world shaped the modern special operator, and how he's turned decades of lived experience into both history and Cold War spy thrillers. This is Combat Story. Welcome back to the show, everyone. My name is AJ Pasciuti, and I'm the host of Combat Story. I'm here with my new friend, James
Stejskal.
Stejskal, yeah, thank you. So if you're just tuning in, the first question I asked right before we started was like, wait, one more time, how do you pronounce your name? And his line was, with great difficulty. And as somebody with as crazy a last name as I have, I can identify with that. Super excited to be back here today. I'm with James Stejskal.
I'm going to correct you one more time, and I'm going to use a line that an ambassador once used on me, and he said, I'm having trouble with your name, and I finally figured out the best way to pronounce it. And I did not come up with this, but it was so cool I had to keep it. He said, stays cool. And so smash it together, stays cool.
I'm never going to forget that. So that's perfect. So without further ado, James Stejskal, former U.S. Army Green Beret, Special Forces in Berlin, later on a CIA case officer, and now a military historian and novelist exploring real-world edge of Cold War espionage and special operations. We asked James to come on the show because I think that he's got a really ton of very cool stories along the way in the Cold War period, and also taking on into a new dimension of storytelling using history as a framework. So without that further ado, I'd like to introduce James Stejskal to the show.
Thank you, AJ. It's great to be here. Glad to be here.
Oh man, I'm excited for this one. This is going to be great. I can already tell we're going to be good friends through this thing. So my first question generally leads off with is I'm always fascinated with service. As the show is Combat Story, we always talk about people's desire to serve their country or to serve their community. What led you towards service in the armed forces, and then eventually led towards service in the United States Army?
It's funny because I've been dealing with this question a lot in my head right now. I'm actually kind of working on a memoir for my family, and obviously the first part of it is I started out as a child, and then to steal from. I guess I can't steal from him because he's persona non grata now, but it was Bill Cosby. In any event, my father was a military man. He served in the Second World War. He was a combat engineer and served in Europe. In Battle of Bulge, he was with Patton's 12th Corps, an independent combat engineer battalion. After World War II, he was a reservist. He went back to his normal job, and he went overseas at least one more time to Europe during the Korean War. That's when they sent all the other National Guard and trained normal troops to Korea, at least until MacArthur got there and started to straighten things out. So my dad was he was my mentor, but he was also the person I grew up most wanting to be like. And having access to his library, all his books, Patton's War as I Knew It, and everything else, all that was imprinted on me. And then naturally, all the war movies we watched and John Wayne films.
Oh yeah.
But
The
so
Duke.
and then my family was kind of bizarre anyway. My oldest brother was probably a rebel without a cause before James Dean, and he was into hot rods and motorcycles, but he was actually pretty far to the left wing side of things, and he became an artist. He's a sculptor. He's still around. He's living up in Albuquerque. So that's another one of my influences. Then my middle brother, who was probably a bit to the right of Genghis Khan, or at least he used to be, became an FBI agent. My mom was an educator. And so I was somewhere in between those three or four. And
a really like a hodgepodge, not a hodgepodge, but like a very, I would say, eclectic upbringing of influences around.
I think that's a good way to put it. A bon melange, a mixture of things. But I'm growing up in the Middle West, in Omaha, Nebraska, right on the edge of the Great Plains. I'm influenced by Omaha as sort of a center of trade between West and East. I never quite got into the farmer cowboy side of things. I was more Eastern in that regard, and I grew up with things like Ian Fleming and James Bond.
Ooh, yeah.
Where Eagles Dare, Lawrence of Arabia, all those things. So I was inclined towards the military, but I was also inclined towards adventure. I wanted, at various times, I wanted to be a forest ranger, and then I wanted to be a marine archaeologist, and then I wanted to be a spy, and then I wanted to be a soldier. And then I went to college and couldn't figure out what the major in, so I quit and joined the Army.
So I know that you did a stint at the University of Nebraska. Did you feel that there was a push away from college, or was there a pull towards the Army itself? Or was it kind of a mash of both?
Well, both. My dad went to college. My mom ended up getting her doctorate. Both my brothers went to college. The artist got his MFA and went off to work with veterans and do art. My middle brother became a lawyer and got hired by the FBI. I was, much like my time in the Boy Scouts, my parents said, go to the Boy Scouts, your two older brothers did. Then they said, go to college, your two older brothers did. So I went to college, and after about a year, or actually about halfway through the first year, I'm going, there's nothing here I really want to major in. There's nothing I want to do. I want to go out and do something. And a friend of mine were thinking about doing marine treasure hunting, scuba diving and stuff. I'd already got my qualification. I was on my way to becoming a scuba instructor even before I went into college. So I figured the best place to get some more training for that kind of stuff would be not in the Navy, but in the Army to become a diver, because I wanted to be a Special Forces diver. And here somebody else like Clive Cussler comes in. So I've got all these bizarre influences. Don't mention the Iliad and the Odyssey, which my mom made me read, or the Hobbit. So I'm getting all these bizarre things. So I joined the Army because I wanted to be an adventurer.
That is exactly, you took the words right out of your mouth, right out of my mouth. I'm like on the edge of my seat with that, because I hear this a lot from young men and women that I have conversations with that are kind of like, well, I just want to go and I want to explore and I want to go live this life of adventure. And I'm like, well, I mean, like the military has that option where if I too went through and knew when I was in school as a high school student that it just really wasn't, I just really wasn't enjoying all of it. I felt kind of boxed in. I was a Boy Scout myself. I sought adventure. I sought danger, action, whatever that was. And knowing your resume now, I think that you had made the absolute right choice, given your influences early on and then moving into the career that you did. So I guess that leads me into my next question. So when you arrived in the Army, did you think that you were signing up for a career, or did you think that you were signing up for like, hey, I'll do, my first stint and kind of see how it is? Or were you like dead set, I'm going to run down this path. I've found my calling per se.
Well, I first have to say that my my parents were, on one hand, mystified, and on the other hand, appalled. My mom, the educator, said, you're ruining your life. You're joining the Army as what? An E1. She didn't know what an E1 was, but I came in as an E1 private. And my dad was going, I think this is a good thing, because he was a naturally military guy, and he wasn't hard over on me going to college. He said, do whatever you want. My brothers were just, what? Why did you do that? And for me, it was a stepping stone. I intended to get training, and I then intended to go out and become Clive Cussler or something like that. I don't even know if Clive was writing when I went in, but I think he was. So one thing led to the other. First, I went to the 82nd Airborne, obviously basic training and AIT at Fort Polk, which is a lovely garden spot. They called it Tigerland at the time because they used it a lot for Vietnam training because it was a swamp and mimicked the territory around Vietnam. So I could tell you all kinds of stories about basic training and doing qualification fire in the middle of a hurricane or a tropical storm, at least. Interestingly enough, despite the rain and wind and everything else, for night fire, we were out there shooting. We all qualified.
I love that. I love that.
And I think that was because the DIs knew that they couldn't put an extra training day and to make us come back and do it. So everybody got across. So I enlisted to go into airborne infantry. I was a bonus baby. I signed up for 4 years. I said, I'm intending to go to Special Forces. My recruiter said, this is the way to do it. Airborne infantry, you can volunteer for Special Forces as soon as you get to parachute training, airborne training. No, that was not true at all.
Oh, the infamous recruiters.
Yeah, a typical recruit. So I went through training, ended up going to the 82nd Airborne Division, first of the 508th B Company. I was there, first an infantryman, and then luckily I had a Special Forces captain as company commander. He said, and I had told him that I wanted to go to Special Forces, but the recruiter said no. He kind of helped me along. Tell you, the 82nd is now and was a good unit, but in the 1970s, in the middle of Bolar, not so much. There were a lot of issues going on, racial issues, people that did not want to be in the military, people that did. When I got to Fort Bragg, along with several hundred other guys from parachute school, we had been bussed up there. We went into the theater and got a speech from the commanding general. who was Frederick Croson, I remember now later. And he got up on the stage and said, "Welcome to the 82nd Airborne Division. You're either going to die or you'll either die here or," now I can't even remember the phrase. Basically, he was saying, "You're never going anyplace else." And
Wow.
I said, I have questions about that, but I did not ask him. I wrote a letter to 2 state senators from Nebraska and said, "I really don't like it here. I want enlisted to go to special forces. That was my intention, et cetera, et cetera." And that started what is popularly known as a congressional investigation, which is not necessarily a good thing to do when you're in the Army if you want your superiors to like you very much.
Oh, I'm loving this.
Apparently, they liked my letter, and they did the investigation. We were out in the field once, and we were out in the field on Fort Bragg. We had just gone through the 1973 October War. The entire division had been put on alert, everything. We got out of that, and we were in the field, and one day a Jeep comes flying into our camp. I don't know how he found us or not, driven by this major. I said, "That's kind of weird, seeing a major driving a Jeep by himself." And he gets out, talks to our company commander, and I get called over, and the major says, "You're going with me back to headquarters." And the captain was trying to convince him that we're in the middle of a field exercise and he couldn't break me free. And the major goes, "You don't understand, Major, or Captain. He's going back with me."
This wasn't a question. It wasn't a request.
It wasn't a request. He was the deputy judge advocate general. And I went back to division headquarters and walked into the office, and he said, "Do you know what a congressional investigation is?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, you're about to find out." And we walked in to see the JAG himself, who was a full colonel. And they asked me a bunch of questions. And apparently the JAG liked my letter for some reason. And he said, "Well, we're going to give you a chance. You're going to go take the physical test and the written test. And if you pass those, you can go through the qualification course.
Really?
If you don't pass it, you'll probably end up in the 8th Infantry Division in Korea."
You have
which
one
is
of
not
two
a good
options
option.
here. Yeah.
So with that kind of motivation, I went over to Smoke Bomb Hill, where the Q course starts, wearing my maroon beret, was instantly told by one of the TACs to take that thing off. Apparently there was a rivalry going on.
Yeah, I've heard a little bit about the rivalry of the berets in the Army. We don't have that. As far as being a Marine, we didn't have that that subculture. But I understand that is pretty prevalent inside of the Army and was for a very long time.
There were a couple of incidents, but that was probably one of the first ones because Special Forces had its beret since officially since like 63, 62. And the Airborne units got the beret in 73. And so it was a new thing. So somebody within the 82nd decided it'd be a fun idea to go into the Special Forces area, and we have a statue there called Bronze Bruce. And it's a Special Forces soldier leading off. They painted his beret maroon.
Oh.
Yeah, it started some shit. So the 82nd had a big water tower, and they had painted on their proud new maroon beret. And naturally, a team of Special Forces guys went up and painted that one green. I think that's when they called a truce and said, "This is going too far." Anyway, so I went into the middle of that. So that was fun. That's a little bit over a year had passed in my time in the Army. So I learned a little bit about being a conventional infantryman. I was a recoilless rifle crewman during the uh, the October War, and we were getting ready to drop into the Golan Heights with our gun jeeps and everything else. So we were all pretty excited about that, not really knowing much about Russian tanks or anything. But so then I went to Special Forces training, and it's all been all downhill from there.
So you started as airborne infantry. What did airborne infantry give you that helped later on while you were becoming a Green Beret? And then what did you have to unlearn to become a special forces soldier? What were the differences that you saw?
You hit the crux of the matter. This is the difference between conventional army and unconventional army. The 82nd basic training, AIG 82nd, taught me how to be a conventional soldier, tactics, weapons, how to polish your boots, all those nitnoy things. Special Forces training tries to use those technical skills, but tries at the same time to break you from that regimen, that straightforward thinking. And that's what was emphasized all the way through is the regular army might do it this way. We're going to look for the end around and try to never go straight into the thing. We used to make jokes about the Rangers, and I'm sorry because I have some Rangers friends, but this was sort of applicable that and it kind of applies to the Marine Corps too at the time
ready.
of this.
I can already feel this coming.
If there was a target in front of you and it involved a brick wall, going through the wall was the way to the target as far 100%. As the Rangers were concerned.
Yeah.
And there's some merit to that if you have enough people and want to die. But the Special Forces guys are going, where is the back door? Where are we going to get in? In fact, is there anybody in there that likes us that we might be able to just say, use him instead of actually going in there ourselves to do it? So,
the funny trope I always heard from Army war planners when joking, kind of making fun of Marines, and they're like, all you guys go through all of this big planning stuff just to do a frontal attack every time. And we're like, yeah, that makes sense. That's basically what the Marines and we have all of these war colleges and stuff, and it all ends with just do a frontal attack. And that's just baked into Marines and Rangers, and I completely understand it.
Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Correct.
That kind of goes into a sort of a tangent there, as I'm always wondering about the combined arms schools or war colleges. Why do they always concentrate on all the Civil War battles? Because most of them are just that, straightforward, and whoever survives wins. The other idea is it's hard to do studies of other decent battles because then you have to go overseas. We haven't had that many wars in the United States. But there's another story I kind of like about planning. I met later in my career an old grizzled Vietnam colonel, full colonel. He was in charge of plans at U.S. Army, U.S. UCOM in Stuttgart. And they had a whole room that was full of plans. The plans to invade Libya, the plan to invade Russia, just several hundred of them. But he had one up there. He said, see that one? Up in the corner. It was about this thick and it had 3 letters on it, MSU. And he said, that's our most important plan. And I go, what's that? And it goes, make shit up. Because that's what always happens. We make all these other plans and something happens and you have to go right to that one.
The enemy gets a vote on every one of our plans, and we have to be able to adapt on the fly.
So going back to the end of 1973, 74, I went into training, and you were asking about how these skills apply. Well, each Special Forces team, Special Forces is organized weirdly. They have the smallest theoretical element is an A team. And the A team is made up of 12 guys, most of the time. There are 2 officers in charge. At the time when I was there, was a captain and a lieutenant. The lieutenants were good for not much besides cranking the generators, and the captains were there to sign all the paperwork and be in charge if something went bad. Then there were all the NCOs. There were 2 guys at the top, the team sergeant, who is basically the operations sergeant, and an intelligence sergeant, operations intelligence. And then there were the other specialties. There was weapons, medical, engineer or demolitions, and communications. So you would have 2 of those guys on each team. And so obviously weapons, they were drawing from the 11B field, the infantry field, and you'd be further trained on all kinds of interesting weapons, how to use them, how to fix them, how to employ them. While the medics would go off to be junior doctors, the communications guys, we were using Morse code at the time, could generally send and receive 25 words a minute, which is pretty damn fast. I think the only guys that are faster are the Navy guys.
We won't give them any credit, though. It's okay. We can.
Yeah, I'll let them find it out, because the commo guys always had frizzled hair because of all this. Yeah. The medics are incredibly well trained. In fact, that's where the physician's assistant program came from, was the Special Forces medical program. Who'd I forget? The engineers could build things and then blow them up just as well. The operations and intelligence people are well trained in planning and in intelligence operations. I'm forgetting somebody, no. But anyway, so it's a very diverse force building element, because the idea about special forces is you send them in to train guerrilla troops, guerrilla forces in behind the lines. And the idea is not for them to engage directly in combat, although they usually get into it, but to raise and train a local indigenous force to fight the oppressor.
Mm-hmm.
And so one 12-man element basically has the materials and the skills and the training to raise a 1,500-man battalion.
Oh, wow.
And that's what they were doing in Vietnam. That's what they've done in the Philippines, in El Salvador. That's what they tried to do in Kurdistan. We can't make up our mind whether the Kurds are our friends or not. At least in Washington, they can. And so that's the idea about special forces. So the training is all oriented to that. The first weeks, the phase 1 of the qualification course, SFQC, is basically kind of like ranger school. You do all the patrolling, the leadership tasks, but it's all oriented on extremely small unit stuff. And you're also doing a lot more, you have to figure it out yourself kind of training. They've drawn from the OSS qualification and training programs. The second part of special forces training, it's changed quite a bit now because they've added in other weird stuff, is your specialty training. So the medics would go to Fort Sam to be trained as a medic, and that's a long course. 38 weeks when I went through, I did get retrained as a medic, or cross-trained. The engineers go off to a special course. You've already trained as a conventional engineer. Now you're being retrained as a special forces engineer. And the commo guys would go off to their own commo school, where they would be learning how to put these high-frequency radios at the time into effect. And you're not using walkie-talkies. You're using long-range burst commo, Morse code, very complex for them, antenna theory and everything else. And then later on, once you've gotten one of those specialties, you'll probably be cross-trained in one of the other ones, or you'll get cross-trained in operations and intelligence. And there's a special course for that, but that's generally only for the mid-range to senior NCOs. Then the third part of the course is called Robin Sage, and it's been Robin Sage since the early 60s. That is the final culmination, training and exercise, where you actually learn how to be a team, a member of a team, and a team to conduct unconventional warfare. You learn how to do direct action missions and things like that, but the crux of the matter is unconventional warfare. And the final exercise is going into a notional occupied country called Pineland for this exercise, where you have your own guerrilla force, which are mostly boys and girls, I should say, from the backwoods of North Carolina, and you're fighting against an oppressor. The 82nd Airborne, the Rangers, whoever got there, got tagged with the duty that year. It's a very good course. So at the minimum, you're looking for 7-8 months of training. I think now it's been extended out to anywhere from a year to a year and a quarter to get through and to get into special forces. So you're talking about a person who has devoted quite a bit of their life just to get training to join this outfit. So you better be committed to it.
Yeah, very much so. It seems a lot where I understand that special forces training is very much about toughness, but I would also associate that it's a lot about judgment. Was there a specific moment in time in your training that you saw that, we joke about Marines all the time, or Rangers, right? That, toughness is our primacy, is the thing that we're able to like punch through walls because we choose to punch through walls. Is there a moment in your training or in your pipeline or in Robin Sage that you saw that it was judgment taking precedence over toughness?
Having the physical abilities to get through the training is naturally important. But I think more important is that ability to think independently, to work together with another group, to make decisions as an individual and make decisions as part of a group to come to a good solution. So judgment has to be in there. And that's constantly granted. Your ability to lead obviously takes a lot of tactical and common sense to get through, but your ability to lead your people and have your people follow you is very important. You're judged on your leadership abilities and you're judged on your followership abilities. They're always throwing in these little hooks and diversions and detours to get you to do things that might be right or might be wrong. And the physical abilities, you see a lot of guys that have the physical abilities, but they just don't have the will to continue training. They will go through the training and they'll hit a point where they break. Mm-hmm. And then you have other guys that will go all the way through the training, but the attacks, the instructors just say he doesn't have the ability to make those decisions, to lead the people, to have what it takes to go on. And so all the way through, beginning to end, the course gets smaller and smaller and smaller. We started out around 110 people. I graduated 13.
110 to 13? My goodness.
Yeah. And that was over 8 months of training.
Right. And so, I mean, a lot of people associate, special forces military training with being, like a constant like gut check. Right. But what I'm hearing from you is that it's so much more, yes, I think that the physical prowess or the physical toughness is a standard that is expected. But there's like this mental resilience that's associated. There's this mental adaptation that's required through there. I think that if I were to be, on the outside looking in, I would think that the mental game would be the thing that would wear people down more often than not, especially over the physical. If there was one thing that, post, graduation of, the Q course, right, and Robin Sage and everything incorporated with that, what advice would you give to somebody, to you, right, if you were on the back end getting ready to start?
I truly don't know. Yeah, Going through the course, I mean, I've done later courses that required similar kind of output, but at that moment, I did not have any clue of what I was getting into. I did not have a problem with the physical portion. I had a problem with some of the technical aspects of it. I was able to talk my way out of it. And so the only thing I can say is you just you just have to be physically ready for it, but you also have to be technically astute enough to know what to do and what not to do. And I'm not really sure there's a good way to prepare for that other than through life's experience. When you're a kid, go to be a Boy Scout and learn how to be a patrol leader. Learn all the details, get all your merit badges. Those are things that are going to help you along the way. Dealing with other people, having a paper route, thing.
Yeah.
You just can't go into it from a one. You have to be multifaceted. You can't just play baseball. You can't play baseball or football and expect that will happen unless you were the quarterback where you actually had to lead the team. Yeah, it's a hard one.
I think one of the things that I like to tell young Marines or young men and women that are looking to enter in is I think that you're right. I completely agree that, being, monofaceted is great if you're a specialist in something, but what I'm learning about the Green Berets is you can't be a specialist in anything. You have to be a specialist in adaptation. And so I would say remaining teachable is a huge component of that. And I would completely agree, based on your upbringing through this.
There's an old Japanese saying, which is quite often taken out of context. A master of many trades, but
is it a jack of all trades, master of none?
Exactly. Or he has many knives, none of them sharp.
Oh,
and in the context, it sounds like you're talking bad about the person. But in the actual original version, and I can't quote that one either, it's a compliment. Because if you have only one sharp knife, you're limited. But if you have many knives, you can still do the job or many jobs. And that's kind of what you have to be when you're in special forces. There are other analogous trades, obviously, but it's very true in special forces.
I love that. I'm actually looking at many knives, but none of them sharp. An idiom or proverb used to describe someone who is a generalist, a person who has knowledge or tools for many things, but lacks deep expertise or sharpness in any single area. But it's the idea of saying, like, yes, we can have specialists in certain things, and I completely understand. I was a sniper for a long time, but if I was only a sniper, I was only good at being a sniper in long range precision shooting, but that meant that I wouldn't be good at anything else. I had to be multifaceted because the theater, the environment demanded that I had to be multifaceted. I couldn't just say every problem needed to be solved by long range precision fire, because that's just not the way the world works.
I only recently came across the original context because I had used the jack of all trades, master of none, which thank you for reminding me, and the knife analogy to be negative. But I only recently read, and I'm within the past couple of weeks, that the Japanese original was not negative.
So perfect. So now take me through. So you graduated your training. You have your Green Beret. Okay. So tell me what it was like.
The bottom one is an original from the 1950s for 10th group. So I never put that one on. The next one up is the one I got in 1974 when I graduated, and the top one was the last one I wore when I got out in 1996. So as you can tell, it means a lot to me. All of it.
Yeah.
Anyway, now we were in formation in front of Bronze Bruce, whose beret was had been restored to the original bronze color. and they read out our names and basically tossed us our beret and said, "Okay, you may don your Green Beret." And it was probably the of all the diplomas and badges and everything else I got, that was probably the finest moment in my Army career. There is now a statue out in front of the headquarters for Special Forces at Fort Bragg. It's a statue of John F. Kennedy and General William Yarborough, face to face. And this is the moment when General Yarborough, against Army regulations, wore his Green Beret to meet the president.
Really?
Despite the fact that the 18th Airborne Corps commander, a 3-star, said specifically that I will crush you if you wear this stupid hat. And Yarborough said, and wore it. And President Kennedy said, "You really like your Green Beret, huh?" He had been somewhat briefed by his military aide, and General Yarborough gave him the history of it. Said, "Yes, we really like these because this says who we are." The beret originally came from Lord Lovett's commandos in World War II and all this stuff. So Kennedy basically said, and he wrote a letter basically codifying the fact that the Special Forces would, from here forth, wear the Green Beret. And, that was the moment. And that's why, if you go to Arlington, every day there is a Green Beret lying on his tomb. The Special Forces was there, and one of the soldiers put his beret on the grave, giving it back to JFK.
What?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's so incredible. I love the history on that and just the homage to it. What an incredible, piece of iconography that is tied to American history. Absolutely love it. Absolutely love it.
Kennedy was very much a supporter of Special Forces, a supporter of the mission, unconventional warfare, and very much was interested in being able to do that mission, something that was different than the conventional way of breaking things. So.
Right. I completely agree. Okay, so take me through your first duty station. So after you got your Green Beret, I'm assuming you get orders, and do you head off to Special Forces Berlin? Is that your first duty station?
No, not that soon. Nobody got sent off right off the bat to Berlin. That comes later. So a couple of us had formed sort of a clique in training. And we were very much in agreement that we did not want to stay at Fort Bragg. Right then, there were basically 3 places to go. Everybody had been pulled back from Vietnam. The first group had been disbanded out of Okinawa. There was some people down in Panama, 7th group, oriented towards South America and Spanish-speaking countries. We did not want to go there. We did not want to stay at Fort Bragg, where 5th group was, because too close to the flagpole. And Fayetteville, Fort Bragg and Fayetteville, probably, well, you can come up with a Marine Corps analogy, but it was bars, pawn shops, used car dealerships, and other troublemen.
Did you say Fayetteville?
Fayetteville, yeah.
Oh yeah, you mean Vietnam? Yeah, no, I've been to Fayetteville.
Yeah.
We our joke was Jacksonville, North Carolina was very similar to Fayetteville. We have the very similar tropes. Yes.
Yeah. There were some people that loved it. I mean, Bragg was the biggest military base in the United States. I think it still is, personnel-wise. Mm-hmm. But we wanted to go to the European-oriented group, and that was 10th Special Forces. So there was 1 battalion forward in Bad Zoltz in Germany, and then there were 2 battalions that were in Massachusetts, Fort Evans. You could not go straight to Bad Zoltz either. So we politicked and called the lady who knew everybody and everything, who was called Miss Billy Alexander. up in the Pentagon.
Okay.
And she was the basically the HR for Special Forces guys. And we politicked with her, sent her flowers and nice things, and said, this is where we want to go. So we were lucky, all 5 of us in that little group, 6 maybe, got sent to Fort Evans. So I got my orders. I show up at Fort Evans, did some staff duty stuff for a couple of weeks, and then they said, you're going down to ODA 222. All our teams were numbered. 222 meant the 2nd Company, the 2nd Battalion, and the 2nd Team. So each company had 6 teams. So I was assigned to the 2nd Company and B Company of the 2nd Battalion, 10th Special Forces Group. That's how it worked at the time. Anyway, so I went to the company, showed up. Nothing real exciting happened. I don't think very many people were there that day. And the guy that was there said, you're in 222, go across the street into one of those old wooden T buildings. And your team room is the first one on the right. Somebody should be there. Go over and see him. So I had my best duty uniform on, which was OD greens, not greens, but standard green, OG 107, I think it was called. And I'm wearing boots that are spit shined, and I go over there and report in. There's one guy in my team room.
Do you want me to break your heart? Do you want me to break your heart real quick? I am of the generation. I have no idea how to spit shine boots. I was never taught in boot camp. I came in with the suede boots. I could not. If somebody told me today that I had to like spit shine boots to be able to pass an inspection, I couldn't do it. So it's one of those things where you're like, oh man, the little things we lose along the way, right? These little differences of the generations.
It's actually not a bad thing not to know, because there's no rational purpose to do it. Anyway, I walked in and there's one guy in the team room, Rich Bucco. He was the team engineer. He stands up and I introduce myself and say, I'm reporting to the team. And he goes, I heard we were getting somebody. And I'm standing in the center of the team room, and he walks around me, looks at me. I said, yeah, you look good. Don't ever show up like this again. Yeah. Don't ever spit shine your boots. Don't ever get your uniform starched. Nothing. And so from there on, I knew this is going to be a sort of a different experience.
Dude, that's incredible. Okay, and so how long were you at that unit? And did you deploy out of there, or what were your deployments or your workups or any of that kind of stuff like?
I was there for about 2.5 years. Did several deployments. We had stateside exercises where we would go up to New York for winter training, ski training. We'd go to the mountains to practice. And we actually had training missions too. We went up to Fort Drum, New York. It was Camp Drum at the time. And the 2nd Marines came up. And they were learning cross-country skiing. So we were the cadre to teach them. And that goes into our teaching. Special Forces people are teachers.
Yeah, if you guys can train Marines to ski, you can teach anybody anything.
What we can't teach them is how to do a campfire, because one night they were having a big campfire and they had been doing some mortar fire, and they had all the cardboard tubes they were using to stoke the fire with. One of the guys, who probably did not realize the difference between an empty cardboard tube that weighed probably half a pound and a tube that had a 81 millimeter mortar. I can't even remember the numbers anymore. Threw it into the fire.
What?
I don't remember how many people went to the hospital, but they were just lucky it was not a white phosphorus around.
Yeah, that would have been pretty rough. So at that time, did your unit have an adversarial threat, or did it have somebody that you were focusing on, or a region in the world that you guys were focusing on, or was this general kind of just being ready and training purpose?
10th Group was oriented towards Europe, Eastern Europe specifically. So that was our big enemy, the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact. We had different countries of responsibility. So if you were on a team, you might be oriented towards going to Norway or maybe towards Austria, maybe towards Greece, places where we expected there was going to be a Russian onslaught. And they would be expected to remain as stay-behind troops as the Russians rolled over them. Other teams were projected to go even further. And so we had teams projected to go into places like Yugoslavia, into Poland, Ukraine, and like that. My team was oriented towards, initially it was oriented towards Greece, and it changed later on. It was oriented towards Eastern Germany. So our practice was toward that. We were all learning German. Some of the guys knew more than others. We had a lot of Lajak people who were Eastern European refugees who joined the American Army to get their citizenship. So we had guys speaking Czech. We had a Hungarian fighter pilot who had defected and joined the Army. We had a merchant marineman from Poland. We had all kinds of people like that.
Wow.
It was a very eclectic group of people, I can assure you.
That's kind of what I see like with special forces, I don't see them, and anytime that I've interacted with Green Berets from around the world, they're never a very monolithic group. They're very eclectic. They come from different places. I think that's it seems like it's almost part of the DNA is looking for, diverse backgrounds, personalities, perspectives to solve what I would say is very complex problems. And so I think it's probably one of your strengths is what it seems like that I've been able to notice at least.
Yeah, the people that you meet are incredible. I came from a conventional American background. Yeah, I could speak some German when I first went in. I could speak a little Greek from my mom. I could not speak Czech, which is should be my native language, but my father was a first generation Czech. But we had all these people, very strange backgrounds. I remember there was one commo man that we had, and some of these commo men are incredible. We used one-time pads for encrypting messages, which is basically you require a trigraph. You're substituting letters and things like that.
Yeah.
So you have to have either this little wheel that tells you which letter goes where and stuff like this, and then you have to have the pad that has these letters all over it. We had a couple of our commo guys who could send and receive Morse code using that one-time pad and writing down the message in clear text because they were not only sending or listening to the messages, they were decoding it in their head at the same time without using the pad.
That's fantastic.
How they did that, I can never figure out because I was never very good at Morse code. We had another we were supposed to learn it at 10 words a minute. They were supposed to learn it at 20, or maybe it was 18, but most of them could do much better than that. We had another guy, he was a commo guy too. And I think it has something to do with affinity for music. Sending Morse code and learning languages, they're all sort of coded together in that music DNA.
Yeah, like a pattern almost. Yeah.
Yeah. Not only was he a commo guy, he had taught himself how to read hieroglyphics.
Because why not? Because why not?
And he was teaching as an adjunct professor down in Boston at either Yale or Harvard. I can't remember which. But, he's a staff sergeant, whatever. All kinds of strange people like that. Businessmen who had quit work. We had a lot of officers who had been rifted because so many officers got rifted in the 70s, and they had come back to serve. Some of them were good, some of them were not. So yeah, it was just a great place to work. We also had a lot of Vietnam veterans, obviously, at the time, and a big number of those guys were special operations group or studies and observation group guys who had stayed in. And they were amazing guys to learn from. If you're learning fieldcraft, there's no better person to learn it from than a SOG veteran. So
I would imagine.
I remember that well.
So take me in to Special Forces Berlin, Detachment A, or Detachment Alpha, excuse me. I'm on the Detachment Alpha Berlin Brigade website right now. I'm going to read a little excerpt from the About page that says, from 1956 to 1984, Detachment Alpha, a clandestine unit of about 90 Green Berets based in West Germany, were involved in some of the most sensitive operations of the Cold War. They wore civilian clothes, spoke fluent German, and stayed on high alert 24 hours a day. For nearly 30 years during the Cold War, some of America's most elite soldiers worked in secret. Their missions, always classified, are still largely unknown and absent from the history books. Take me through, for people that have never really heard of Special Forces Berlin Detachment A, or Detachment Alpha, excuse me, how do you describe the mission without turning it into mythology?
Actually, I'm going to go into another correction mode right now. You were right the first time. It's called Detachment A, not Detachment Alpha. Yeah,
okay.
It's an A team, an Alpha team, an OD Alpha, whatever. But Detachment A was Detachment A. That was its cover title. It didn't. Its classified designation was 39th Special Forces Detachment. So
okay.
For those 30 years, it was an operation there. While I was in 10th Group, I went forward on an exercise in southern Germany, and we were acting as a unconventional warfare team. We were working with a small group of guerrillas, quote unquote, notional guerrillas, who were actually German Bolshevik or German paratroopers. And we were pretending like the Russians had overrun Germany, and we were operating in southern Germany to fight them. Well, amongst us, not amongst us, but amongst the guerrillas was a guy who was acting as sort of the liaison between the two groups. And he was speaking fluent German to the Germans, and then he would come over and speak to us, and he was kind of talking in broken English. But towards the end of the exercise, he came over to me one day and said, "How you doing?" And it was obvious. Well, it was as clear, fluent English as I had heard him speak. And I said, "Are you an American?" And he goes, "Yeah." And I said, "Are you one of us?" And he says, "Yeah, sort of."
Really?
Yeah. And I go, because he's in civilian clothes, long hair and a beard. He's wearing German Loden, the green wool.
No spit shine boots.
No spit shine boots. And I go, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, I'm in Special Forces, but I'm not with Bad Tolson. I'm not with Massachusetts." And I go, "Where are you?" And I said, "Well, generally we don't talk about this, but I'm from Berlin." And when I heard that, I'm going, I need to find out about that.
My ears just perked up. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And this has adventure written all over it.
Yeah. And by this time, oh wow, I'm not even at the end of my first enlistment, but I start asking around about it. Not very many people know or will talk about it. And I finally got out from one guy that, yeah, this is a pretty cool place. And if you get chosen for it, it's a really good assignment. So I called up Mrs. Palmer again. No, Mrs. Alexander. Well, it was one of the two. There were two ladies. But anyway, I said, "I want to go to Berlin." And she goes, "How's your German?" And I said, I've got, I had a fairly low rating at the time. And she said, call me back in 6 months and get your rating up to whatever it was. And so I spent a lot of time studying, got my German up, my MOS tests and everything. I'd gone to Fort Sam to be cross-trained as a medic. So I had 2 specialties. And I called her back and said, I'll see if I can find you a job. And so she called back a while later, a couple of days, and said, yeah, there's an opening and you can go. So I got my orders and said, report to Tegel Airport on this day in civilian clothes. So I flew Pan Am over to Tegel, got picked up at the airport by another guy in civilian clothes. And they said, you don't need uniforms. Leave your beret at home. All the stuff that shows what you are, it all stays home. And so I showed up there in February of '77, and that's where I forgot about almost all my other intentions or goals in life, and said, I think I'm going to stay here for a while. So I never thought about re-enlisting after that, pretty much. It was, quite frankly, the best assignment I had in the military. And it was, the mission of the unit was similar to what we had out in 10th Group. It was basically, if the Russians attacked, we were to do everything we could to sabotage their forward movement, to slow them down. And some people might think of that as sort of a suicide mission, but I don't think anybody really ever thought of it that. Nobody really even thought of it. But we were in Berlin, which at the time was basically 110 miles inside East Germany, inside communist East Germany. As part of occupied Berlin. We had Russians inside the city, the French, British, and us.
And what year, just to be specific?
This is 1977.
Oh, wow.
So you've got Germany, which was divided in half after World War II in 1945. And then you had Berlin, the capital, which was also divided and was occupied by about 20,000 Allied troops. And by Allied, I mean the French, British, and us. And then you had the Russians. So surrounding us, the East German army was probably around our time about 800,000 troops. And then you have the Soviet forces Germany, which was about 1 million. So 20,000 Allied troops are inside the city, 110 miles from all our buddies in West Germany, the French, the other troops.
I think precarious is the word that I would use.
Surrounded by about 2 million East German and Russian soldiers. So that was sort of the flavor. We kind of looked at Berlin as some people called it the outpost of freedom because we were so far forward. Other people called it potentially the world's largest POW camp.
Yeah, that would. I mean, again, like how did you keep your nerves about you, right? In this, right, where you mean again at the flip of a switch, right? So the East German army and the Russians could effectively just annex, where you were at, the 20,000, coalition forces. And then have, like you said, like the largest POW camp
east of the O. Have you ever seen that cartoon of that big hulking cat with I think he's got a bat in his hand and there's a tiny little mouse with. That was kind of the spirit that was going on. Some people did not like it there, being stuffed inside Berlin, surrounded by a fence. Some guys came there and decided they'd rather be someplace where they could have open areas and ski and rock climb, which was bad adults. And other people took to it. So I was one of the guys that took to it. because it sort of encapsulated almost everything that I had been thinking about, when I was a kid. Here we are doing special operations stuff, but we're doing special forces before we really called it special operations. But we were also doing it in civilian clothes and getting training from the agency on how to work as an underground in a city. Really specializing on things like sabotage. Berlin was surrounded by a railway, and all the rail lines from Eastern Europe going towards northern Germany and most of West Germany came into that circle around Berlin, and then they fanned out again. So what that made was a perfect target for us to try to interdict. So that was a major part of our target set. We were going to go out and take out those rail lines. Very World War II, SOE, OSS sabotage.
Right. So that was my next question is, what did sabotage look like? So was it cataloging and identifying schedules and railway lines and lines of effort, or lines of what we would call now lines of communication, and then figuring out ways to knock them out? Should there be some sort of Russian incursion? Is that kind of the gist of it?
Well, we weren't worried about itineraries because no one knew what they were anyway, or what they would be. What we were looking at was choke points. And we knew enough about them. We were surrounded by the East Germans, yes, but we had great intelligence there because all the Allies had heavy intelligence presence there. We had radio intercept sitting there. Probably the best ASA, NSA, GCHQ listening station in the world was sitting in the middle of Berlin listening to everything. They could listen to telephone calls all the way up to the Russian border. We had overflights. All this intelligence was coming into us. Plus, we had freedom of passage for a very limited number of people to go into East Germany, just as the Russians did in West Germany, to look at things, just to say, we're monitoring that nobody's getting ready for war. All those different aspects were producing intelligence for us that we could use. And so we knew where our targets were, we knew what they were, and occasionally we were able to actually visit them and gather everything we needed for a possible hit. So all our planning was geared on getting out of the city, getting to that target, and taking it out. The mission was to slow the Russians down as long as you could, for as long as you could. We're up to like 72 hours, but 24 to 72 hours. That was to give the people in West Germany enough time to react before Russian reinforcements could get forward.
Okay, that makes sense. So not only were you guys early warning, right? You guys were also, a delay to be able to allow for coalition forces to build their plan and coalesce their forces to react. What were some of the unsexy parts of this? The planning, rehearsals, logistics. What were those kind of things? Take me through some of that stuff.
Well, the logistics was actually pretty cool because we got access to a lot of interesting things from old war stocks, I'll call them, things that the OSS might have used. Now we had early on, we had access to things like exploding coal, blocks of coal that would go into a steam locomotive and then explode. The problem was that by the 70s, the Germans and the Russians were going to diesel, and all that coal they did use was being crushed to be fed into them. So those blocks wouldn't work. So we got rid of most of that stuff. So we were using pretty high tech at the time, things like shape charges, linear shape charges, cone shape charges, things like that, to be able to attack the targets, which were switching yards, bridges, things like that, where you could knock them out and slow them down for a lengthy period of time.
Wow.
So that was pretty interesting.
So I've had a chance recently to go to Washington, D.C., and I went to the International Spy Museum. I got to know, like, how accurate. Like, I went through that whole thing, and I was like, you pick up, an identity, and you kind of go through it, and you have to go through. I remember seeing the Russian or East German vehicles where you had to like be able to hide people inside of them to smuggle. How, realistic, or have you been to that? And like, how realistic is some of those
I've been
depictions?
there. I live right down the street from it. I mean, it's like 4 miles away from my house. I've been there
No, no way.
several times. I've spoken there. I've given stuff to the museum.
No way.
It's very accurate.
Oh, so cool to hear that.
It's also probably the most productive museum in the United States as far as how much money it brings in, because it charges a fairly pretty penny to get in there, but the place is flooded with students and everything else. Yeah, the precept of going in and getting your cover and becoming a spy and all this stuff is kind of bogus, but the exhibits are all really, really cool. And one of the best exhibits, which nobody ever sees because they miss it, is when you walk in, the first part of the exhibit, there's a case that has a document in it. And it's an original letter from George Washington to another officer establishing the first spy ring during the Revolutionary War. And that sets the tone for the rest of it. But it's a great museum. And I'm enthusiastic about it, obviously. Probably the only better museum I've seen, but you can't go to, is the one out at CIA headquarters.
Yeah, sorry, they don't just let me wander in there as a podcast host. Yeah.
But it's not as entertaining. I mean, the one downtown has got movies and stuff like that, and they've got a bookstore, so that makes it cool.
Do you have any of your books in the bookstore?
At last count, I think I had 4 in there.
Oh, just 4? Oh, is that all?
Yeah. Sorry.
That's awesome. That's so freaking awesome.
The bad thing about that mission was that beyond that first task of blowing up bridges, we had a couple of teams that were going to go out and hit 2 headquarters, the East German Army headquarters and the Soviet forces headquarters, sort of like the Dirty Dozen. Beyond that, the mission was basically do the best you can, which kind of said, don't expect to come home for Christmas. But whatever. We didn't think anybody else would be going home for Christmas either if it came to World War III. So that was no fun.
I mean, was that hard to sustain over those number of years, or how did you guys get by with that?
West Berlin was not non-permissive. East Berlin was non-permissive.
Sure.
We were surrounded by a fence, but it was like being in a zoo without any handlers. And it was such a contrast. If you ever saw the movie The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, such a contrast between East Berlin, East Germany, and West Berlin. It was like the lights are on over here, the lights are not on over there. Yeah. So we were able to live. Some people did not like it, but there was 3.5 million West Berliners living in the city, and they all took it. I mean, I suppose you had some people that would have nervous breakdowns, but most of the people that lived there, they didn't have a problem with it. I think it's kind of like living in Norway or Sweden, during the winter. It gets dark, and so they were used to it, and you get used to it too. So we enjoyed it. We had what I call holistic training events. We would go to West Germany for during the winter for ski training. And it wasn't cross-country skiing. It was down the hill and a little cross-country thrown in. So we would be in West Germany 2 weeks in civilian clothes with civilian equipment in places like Garmisch and Berchtesgaden, skiing. Or we would be sometimes diving in the Baltic or sometimes in the Mediterranean.
Wow.
So those would break up things. And that, at the time we thought this is a good deal. But the leaders that put that stuff into effect knew what they were doing, because you have to get out once in a while. You have to enjoy yourself.
So take me through, a normal day, a normal work day for you, not where you guys are, but when you guys are actually operating in plain sight, civilian clothes, walk me through a normal day and what was also absolutely not normal about it.
I'll give you an example of two things that I did not like during training first, and that was code training, Morse code training, where you would actually have to sit down in a room and practice listening or sending. So that was tiresome. And then there was something we called Warsaw Pact identification. And that's where you would go through slides and books of Soviet forces, their equipment, their uniforms, and be able to identify them. Because we had to be able to identify not only the tanks and stuff, but the trucks and support vehicles for each unit, which meant you had to know antenna configurations. You had to know which communications truck belonged with which type of unit, so that you could identify the unit, not just the vehicle, and send that information back to the headquarters so they could know where to go.
T-72, BRDM2, right? Like the Dishkas, the PKM 74, RPK 74, knowing all these pieces. And then I'm sure you guys took it even further and had to identify, like you said, unit insignia, unit configurations, not just individual pieces of armor or equipment, but like you said, who they belong to. That's fascinating. I mean, that's a lot of reconnaissance.
In theory, you could identify a truck with a certain antenna configuration or a certain trailer configuration and say, okay, this truck belongs to this type of unit. There's only 3 of these units in East Germany. Where are we? Which one is it?
Whoa. So now you're pinpointing.
And
wow.
Yeah. So that was tedious. What was not tedious was doing things like the plan was to go over the wall. And I'm not going to talk about that too much because whatever. But our targets were beyond the wall that surrounded the city, so in East Germany. But our plan was to sit inside the city for a while before we did that. So we were planning on how to act as basically an underground unit, much like the French resistance in World War II. How do you survive underground in a big city? So everybody had some sort of an identification that would put them in Berlin as a non-combatant, basically. So based on your language qualifications and your ability to carry a cover, you might be a Turkish street sweeper or a Greek bartender or a Finnish student or something like that, depending on how old you were. So this is an example of one type of identification. It's actually a German driver's license that was counterfeited for us for a certain personality. I don't know who that is. He looks kind of like me, but that, 40 years ago.
Can you tell me what your cover was?
Well, I had several over the years, and
no big deal.
I went from one time being born in Germany of Greek and German parents, speaking German better than I could Greek, and working in a restaurant. So I was actually doing that. And another time I was a student. And we had, beyond doing this is just the driver's license, we had actual passports that were produced for us in our cover names and things like that. So this is part of the weakness of the unit, and part of the strength was we could disappear using these identifications. But that was only during wartime.
Okay.
During normal times, we were whoever we were. We had a military ID or a blue passport. And if somebody asked us what we were doing, we were an American doing whatever we could think of to give us a reason to be there. I'm living here because I'm studying
Russian railway design.
yeah, that works too. Yeah, the architecture of subway stations. You know? Subways go under the ground. Some of them go under the wall. Whatever. So we would also do things like figure out where we were going to stay, places where we could pre-stage equipment, how we would communicate with each other by non-technical means. That means without telephone or radio, and then learning how to do things like dead drops and signals and stuff, all the kind of stuff that you see in the movies. So that was always fun. And that also required us to get out into the city quite a bit. We used to play a game that was where we would have to go out and we would be given a list of things, especially when you first joined the unit. You would be a scavenger hunt. You'd be given a list of things to find. What is located at the corner of this and this? And you'd have to go out there and find it. And then you'd have to go to another place. So you might have 5 or 6 or 10 things to do in one day. What it forced you to do was to use public transportation and to get really familiar with it. So unlike most of the people that served in Berlin, you had to get out and know the city.
Yeah.
From top to bottom and from west to east. And sometimes we would go into East Berlin when we could, when we had the proper means to do so, and also get to know that area. So that was the fun part of the city, the training. Being able to do the weapons training, the demolitions training. We did some of it in the city, the small scale stuff. The big stuff we did out west. Where it got really intense, though, was when we got to counterterrorism mission. And this was before Blue Light, the 5th Group Counterterrorism unit that stood up in 77, and before Delta. Detachment A was given the mission for counterterrorism by the European Command in 1975. Essentially, Detachment A was the first military counterterrorism unit for the U.S. forces. Predates the Delta Force, predates SEAL Team 6. So we were doing a lot of training on that. And I cover it a lot in my book, Mission Iran, because the unit was chosen to assist on the Iranian, on Operation Eagle Claw. And we played a part in that, a big part in it. And but before that, we were doing all the training required to be countering terrorist operations. You know, everything from skyjackings, train occupations, building occupations, all the skills that you needed for that. And that was everything from dynamic entries, explosive entries, to close quarter battle with weapons, sniper operations, working on aircraft. We actually had people out at the international airport in Pan Am uniforms working on planes during the day.
Really?
Getting not flying them, but
sure.
Doing ground handling and baggage handling and stuff, so that you knew how to get close to an airplane that would have a good reason for.
Was there ever a moment where you had your cover blown, or that you were able to identify an operative from an adversary force? Did you have any encounters like that?
Actually, I think everybody in the unit had an encounter like that. I got I was once stopped by a German policeman because I was too close to something that had happened, and I was talking to him in German. And he first accused me of being a Frenchman. And the only thing I could think of at the time was my first German teacher came from Alsace-Lorraine. She was French, but spoke German with a German accent, fluent German, fluent French. And she had taught me with a French accent. So I picked up that. So, and I had other incidents out in the zone when we were doing exercises and pretending to be Germans. Oh, the movie with Brad Pitt, Inglourious Bastards.
Yeah.
You remember the scene in the basement bar where the guy holds up 3 fingers instead of 3 fingers?
Just like this. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's the kind of stuff that would happen. So,
right. It's the little things, right?
Yeah, the cultural nuances that would happen. So,
wow. So I know that you guys were so embedded, and it seemed like that you guys were running teams around and had your, I would say, your hands kind of in everything. My natural question was, I would assume that the Russians or, our enemy forces or potentially terrorist forces had the same things running as well. And if there's any any moments where you ran across people that you suspected they were doing the same thing that you were doing.
Well, one of the things that we learned was that it's extremely hard to put 90 special forces guys into a city and expect them not to be figured out by somebody. So imagine trying to cover. I mean, it's one thing to put a single spy into a country and say, this is your cover and this is why you're there. But when you have 90 guys there that are going to be interacting and things like that, and doing normal stuff, it's extremely hard to put them out there and expect it to work. So early on, and this carried over into the 70s, our cover was fairly porous. People knew that we were not what we purported to be, but they weren't quite sure what. Quite often. When I was researching my book about Special Forces Berlin, which was one of the first ones I wrote, I went into the East German Security Service archives and was able to work with an archivist and try to find out what information they had on the unit. And it was surprisingly very little. They knew about where we were located at. They had none of the names. And the only thing they could surmise was from open source documents about special forces, this is our mission. And the first document I came across was 1975, where they identified the unit. So if that's the only document, that meant the unit was there from 1956 to 1975 without getting noticed.
Operating undetected, yeah. Or unidentified, at least.
Yeah. I'm not sure what the Russians have because they were friends for a while and then they weren't, so I wasn't able to go into their stuff. But the final commander of Berlin, who had been commander of Detachment A in the 1970s, was Sidney Schachnow. And so in 1991, he was the U.S. commander of Berlin, 2-star general. And when everything fell apart and the Russians were being nice, he asked one of the Russians what they knew of the unit. And the Russian said, oh, we were aware of them. And what did you have, 900 men? And Schachnow left it at that. And he said, that's close. But anyway, but the Russians had Spetsnaz. They're special forces people. But we did not think they would try to come after us. They had missions that were going to be in Western Europe, hitting things. The people that we worried about were the East Germans, who also had some small units, specialty units, because Berlin, if Berlin was going to be targeted by the Warsaw Pact, it would be the East Germans who moved in and took it.
Okay.
They had the language capability capabilities. They had the expertise. And the East German Security Service, the Ministry for State Security, which are these people, that sign came from their headquarters, by the way. That's a long story. They had the expertise and they had the undercover people to come after us. So that's
Wow.
It would be like going against the Gestapo in World War II. But Berlin was such a hotbed for espionage because of all the allies there. It was sort of like a free-for-all place. And it was amazing because you'd go downtown and you might come around the corner and witness anything from drug dealing to some kind of underground banditry kind of stuff, selling black market stuff, to actually seeing espionage acts going down in place. I've heard stories and witnessed once on my own the actual where you would actually find an object you knew to be a dead drop, and being able to open it and find out whatever was in it. And it might be a piece of paper with code written on it, or it might be something else. But one of my fun things that I had happen, we were doing an exercise in the city, and we were having a practice clandestine meet between two people. And I was there to provide surveillance for the good guys, the notional good guys. So I was up above this with a camera, a telephoto lens, and I'm taking pictures of the meet going on down below. And as I'm watching this, it's sort of an open area in a shopping area. I'm noticing a guy with a briefcase sitting on a seat aimed at a different restaurant in this place. It's sort of like a food hall. And he's got this briefcase, and he picks it up and moves it a bit, and then moves it back a bit and back a bit. And so he's there, sitting there with it, and then he turns it around so it's sort of parallel to everything. And I got my telephoto lens I'm looking at, and on the side of the briefcase, I can see a pinhole.
What?
And he was there photographing another operation, and he wasn't from us. And so I took all those pictures and I gave them to the American military intelligence unit. They said, we'll pass this to the CIA and see what happens. Never heard back from them, but I don't know what it was. It might have been one of ours, might have been one of theirs, could have been the French or the British, who knows?
What? That's absolutely insane.
So those kind of things were fun.
One of the things that I've recognized is some of the differences between some of our generations is it seemed like in your generation, you guys were really identified that you were in a long game. In the Cold War, we knew that we were in this kind of, not for instance, a stalemate, but we were in this kind of big chess match that was going to take a long time. A lot of members from my generation in the Iraq-Afghanistan conflicts themselves are very used to kind of like instant gratification or a very fast-paced type warfare. What did working in Berlin teach you as far as patience and restraint that maybe members of my generation or future generations may not understand?
Well, first thing I have to say is this is probably the wrong word, but I kind of sympathize with the people that have served in the military for the last 20 years, because you folks have been oriented on one mission constantly for that entire period. And that period, that mission has been, for the most part, Iraq and Afghanistan. So it was kind of, for me, I mean, sitting out here for that, it seemed kind of one-dimensional. While I was in Berlin, it was also one-dimensional. We were focused on the East Germans and the Russians, but at the same time, we were looking at things that were happening around the world. Being in Europe, 10th Group at the time was oriented towards Europe and Africa. So there were a lot of things going on in the periphery. Same thing for 7th Group down in Panama. They were looking at things in South America, where the communists, quote unquote, were doing their long game, trying to subvert governments. Cuba, Bolivia, Peru, Angola, Ethiopia, where the Russians were sending out things and we were trying to counter them. things. So it was a combination of those unilateral things and then the kind of peripheral things, but it was all coming from one enemy. Today, I think for you guys, it's mostly in one area. Yeah, there's more than one area, more than one enemy. But it seems to me that it was a little bit more monotone. I might be wrong on that, but we were looking at a lot of different areas because when I was there, 10th, when you were done with an assignment, you were thinking, where do I want to go next? It's going to be interesting, and so you might be going to Okinawa to go into Southeast Asia, or you might be going to 7th Group to go against the Spanish-speaking problems, or you might go down the bad zones and still be oriented towards East Europe, but also you'd be more oriented towards Africa. So, in that regard, it was a bit different. It seemed like the world was more. It was a bigger place to have more types of conflicts. Although today I think there are more conflicts, they're just smaller in scale.
So one of the interesting things that I've seen that you've alluded to in a lot of your writing, or you've spoken directly to in a lot of your writing in our conversation here, is kind of the post-Vietnam evolution, specifically of special operation forces. So moving out of Vietnam, taking a lot of lessons learned, working with some of the individuals that you've learned from in Vietnam, taking those lessons, bringing them into the Cold War, and then being able to fight a very long strategic war, and then moving into this idea of terrorism emerging, especially in and around Europe. So you frame this arc as a post-Vietnam soft evolution from Cold War to terrorism emerging in Europe. What did it feel like watching the mission set? What did it feel like watching the mission set change in real time?
It's an interesting question. I'm not sure the best way to answer that. All my years before I joined the Army, I was looking at the Army and looking how it did things. And one of the things that impressed me most was not the conventional Army, but the forces that were involved in sort of the so-called sideshows. The guys that work with the guerrillas in the Philippines, the OSS in Europe. And that kind of oriented me on what I wanted to do, not only as an adventurer, but what I wanted to do in the military. So I was drawn to other things like the 007, Jean-Luc Ayres theme stuff, Where Eagles Dare, the small teams that go out and do things. Now, most of it's direct action stuff, crack, flashbang, and all this kind of stuff. But a lot of it is the more subtle, working behind the lines, working in the resistance organizations, doing espionage intelligence operations. So the small unit kind of stuff. So when I joined the military, I'm thinking about Vietnam and not sure really where I'm going. But the one thing that I think impressed me most of all the recruiting brochures I ever saw was, and I have to send you this, is a photo or an illustration of a single special forces guy under parachute at night coming in to a drop zone somewhere where there's big, tall forests, mountains in the back. Mm-hmm. And for me, just sort of encapsulates what I was looking for. That lone operative going in to do something worthy. And so when I'm seeing the military, when I join, I'm seeing the conventional Army and, everything from tank assaults to being involved in 5,000 men brigade mass tactical parachute drops, which was quite an experience. And then going over to working with the small teams, I'm just seeing this as not a natural evolution, but I'm seeing this as a very pertinent way of conducting warfare. We've done insurgency and guerrilla operations from basically day one. It's probably the third oldest profession. I can't remember what the first two are. Anyway, so we were very much involved, especially when I was up at Fort Devens, of doing interesting things like not only doing the unconventional war or stay behind operations, but we were starting to work with police forces on special weapons and tactics teams. We were doing, and this was actually not what we were supposed to do, but we were doing sort of unofficial training of local police forces in tactics that would be suitable for them to use in hostage barricade incidents and later terrorist incidents. So it's not so much that I knew what I was looking at, but I was witnessing an evolution in our methodologies, and in some ways it was going back and retrieving old methods and applying them to new issues. That really came to fore when I got to Germany, because terrorism was starting to rear its ugly head, to use that old phrase, especially in Europe. The IRA, of course, in Northern Ireland and in the UK, starting to be in Europe to some extent. PFLP, Black September, the Red Army faction, Bader-Meinhof gang, the Basque separatists, all these things were popping up in Europe. It was not so much evident in the United States. There were terrorism things going on down in South America, obviously, but in the United States, it was not looked on so much as terrorism as more, I'd say, resistance groups, because you had the Black Panthers, the Hanafi Muslims, things like that. And it was looked at as a broad sweeping generalization, but I think it was more of a racial issue than a terrorism issue in the United States. And I don't mean that in any derogatory sense, but it was true. There were aspects of the African American movements for rights that were peaceful, and then there were the more radical groups that were moving toward violence.
Right.
But we didn't call it terrorism so much. But the only thing we did see were the occasional skyjack, which was more of a individual issue. Somebody, B.J. Cooper, what's his name? Cooper. That was about money. Or somebody wants to go to Cuba, or somebody wants to escape Cuba. It was more individual. In Europe, in the late 60s, early 70s, you were seeing radical groups standing up against governments, mostly Israel, but also the UK, to some extent Germany. And it's becoming a serious issue, which the United States is not really looking at except on this small individual basis. In Europe, you've got the Germans, the British, the French, the Spanish, of course, the Israelis are all standing up counterterrorism units. The British SAS probably have the hold the blank for that one, because they were doing this in Aden in the mid 60s. And we are not looking at so much, but some of the commanders about 1974 are saying, this is probably an issue we're going to have to look at, especially after the Olympic fiasco. The Germans mishandled that. They did not have a force to handle it, but they raised a force quickly. They learned from the British. They learned from the Israelis. The Americans are going, do we have anything like that? And the answer was no. The same question would be asked in the United States in CONUS after the Mogadishu aircraft hijack incident, but that was 1977. And that was sort of the impetus for standing up Delta Force and Blue Light back in the States. So that's a separate impetus. In Europe,
Right.
it was Munich. And the American commander said, do we have anything to handle this? And so everybody said, well, no. So somebody sent out a tasker, and that tasker ended up in Berlin. And Special Operations Task Force Europe said to Berlin, is there anything can you handle this? And the commander, instead of saying, well, it'll take me 2 years to train for it, and I'm not sure, and we need it, just came back with, oh, yeah, we're ready to go now. And then basically they said, okay, we're going to have a test in about a year, and we want you to demonstrate your counterterrorism skills. So
Wow.
Berlin, from that moment, started training primarily towards aircraft hostage incidents, started planning for that and training for it and building up about 1975. So by the time I got there in 77, the unit was already written into the op plans for Europe as the counterterrorism force.
So how long did you stay with Det Berlin or Detachment A Berlin?
I was in Berlin twice. Once with Detachment A from 1977 to 1981, and then I came back in 1984 to 1990. But Det A was no longer in existence in 1984 for a different reason. A new Special Forces unit with the same mission basically had to change the cover. Long story, but Detachment A went away in 1984, and the new unit just happened to stand up in Berlin about 6 months prior to that. So it was a handoff. Yeah. We're no longer here. Yes, we are, but we're over here.
A little sleight of hand. I like
That's
that.
what it was.
So with that, we've covered a lot through this. And the craziest part about this is we have scratched the surface on your incredible, I would say, adventurous life through this. So I know that we have more to talk about. What we're going to do is we're going to place this into a separate episode. We're going to interview you at a later date because I want to know about Operation Eagle Claw. I want to know about your time as a CIA case officer with, non-governmental agencies inside of Central Africa. And then, there's so many more things that I want to ask. And I know that there's also some processes we have to go through before we can openly talk about those. So those will come at a later date. But I do want to circle back to what brought us together in the first place, which is you as an author. So where did the idea for writing come from? And you started with nonfiction, and then you eventually transitioned to kind of a smattering between fiction and nonfiction later on. Where did this idea come from? I mean, was it the first time that you wrote your senator? Because it seems like your writing to your senator had such an impact. Did you want to, go back to your youth in that sense?
That was nonfiction. That was nonfiction what I wrote there. Yeah, believe me, Senator, what I say is true. That's an interesting question because I've always been interested in history and I guess the telling of tales. There are people that do it better than I, but my nonfiction, my history is pretty good, I must admit. I actually started with fiction before. My first fiction book, which I only completed in 2018, 20 something like that. I actually started in 1985 while I was in Berlin. Yeah, and I only had 3 or 4 pages written, but that story stayed with me through the whole time. And my service in Berlin kind of told me where to take the story.
Okay.
But going back to the origin of my actual, I guess, commercial writing when I was going for the first publication was I was in Southern Africa, in Namibia, which is now previously known as the German Southwest Africa prior to World War I. It was one of 4 German colonies in Africa. I think a lot of people know about East Africa, German East Africa, because that's where a major portion of the war was fought. But German Southwest Africa, which just happens to have the largest diamond mines in the world, was desired by the crown of England. And so when World War I was about to start, in fact, actually before any shot was fired in Europe, the British government started with the German colonies in Africa. They started up in Cameroon. That's actually where the first rifle shot was fired in World War I.
Wow,
But then
did not know
German Southwest Africa had about 2,000 colonial troops, German colonial troops, and then there was South Africa right next to it. So South Africa, being a part of the Commonwealth, was requested by the king to kick the Germans out of German Southwest Africa. And I had done I've done a lot of reading about German East Africa, but I was struggling to find out anything about what the war in German Southwest Africa. So I was bound to determine to find out. And I could find stuff in English about the English part of the war, or the South African part of the war, and then I could find stuff about the German part, but I couldn't find anything that meshed together. So I said, well, there's only one way to do this.
I love
research
this.
it and write the book yourself.
I love this. Gosh, you're such a Green Beret. You're such a Green
So
Beret.
I spent, I was on the battlefield. I knew where everything was, and I even went into a souvenir.
Really?
And so I didn't say that to him until after I bought it. But I said, thank you very much. And I said, this is going to help me out a lot. So those kind of little details. And then I started going out and plotting all the different battles. I came across the diary of the German commander and some other people, went into the archives in South Africa and Botswana, pulled up all kinds of weird stuff, and wrote a pretty concise history of what happened. It was a short war. It was only about a year, but it was fun. And like I said, I got out on the battlefield and got to experience it. And that's where I started learning about that subfield of archaeology called conflict archaeology. And I wrote that book. And then I was back in the States about a year later, and we were having a reunion of the Berlin group, which is getting ever smaller and smaller. During that reunion, we started talking about the history of the unit and who was going to preserve that history. And we knew basically that if we let the Army do it, it would A, either never get done, or B, they would do it badly. And so we're talking about this, and some fool over in the corner goes, hey, he wrote a book. And I said, guilty as charged. What's your idea? I said, you write it.
So you got voluntold to do this, basically.
So then that's when I started on the Special Forces Berlin book. And I interviewed about 60 people. There's some amusing stories in those interviews. I called one guy, an old guy from the very early on. And he said, I can't talk to you about that. It's classified. I said, there's a way to do this. I interview you, I write it, then I submit it so that it will be cleared by the Army. And he goes, okay. He talked to me. Then I called another guy and said the same thing. I got through the first sentence and he hung up on me.
Wow. I love, there's a level of professionalism. The guys are like, no, they said, take this to the grave. I'm taking this to the grave. That's like a level of professionalism. I think it's pretty unmatched. That's awesome.
It is, but one of those guys that hung up on me later called me back and said, I hear you're writing a book. And I wanted to say, you're obviously not listening to me the first time. So whatever. So that took probably took about 2 years to write, with all the interviews and trying to dig up the material, the official documents and everything. And then it took about another year and a half for it to get through the clearance process.
Yeah. Yeah, I've done the clearance process with the DoD myself. I'm glad it's there. It's a lengthy process, but again, it's a process that makes sure that we're not going to hurt anybody who's still in the fight,
Yeah.
and jeopardize them.
And there's a lot of people that try to get around it, and a lot of people that hold to. Mike Vickers, for example, is a friend of mine. We were Spec Boards together. He later became Assistant Secretary of Defense. He had a little bit more chutzpah than I. But then there are people that just blow it off, which I found out when I wrote Mission Iran. I wrote, this always happens to me. I mentioned a certain special forces group that goes by the fourth letter of the alphabet, and the government says, take that out. And so I did the same thing this time, knowing exactly what would happen. But I also referenced the book by the guy that started the unit, Charlie Beckwith.
Yeah.
It was in my bibliography. So I got the manuscript back from the agency and from the Army. And they said, you got to take this out. You got to change it to something else. And then I go back to my bibliography. His book's gone. I go, what's the deal? And what I found out later is Charlie never got his book cleared.
Yeah.
So the Army does not like that.
Yeah, no. I went through the Marine Corps. I got their approval. I also went through the Department of Defense, and any agency that my story touched, they had to send it to. And so it took a long time, and it's difficult for publishers to understand that, especially in a world where they're used to hitting timelines. And when we give it to the government and we say, it's up to the government at this point. I was laughing with it because they were kind of freaking out on time, and I was like, you mean hurry up and wait? No, I'm good at this. Right? I've been preparing for hurry up and wait my whole life. This is fine. We're kind of in my realm. So Special Forces Berlin, clandestine Cold War operations of the U.S. Army's elite, 1956 to 1990. James Stejskal is the author of that book. And any of those listening to this podcast, I would highly recommend it. It's a fantastic read as we kind of go through it. I really look forward to this. And then continuing interviews. What I think is so fun about it is not only did you take the nonfiction aspect, you continued down the pathway of writing fiction into the Snake Eater Chronicles. So briefly, if you can take me through the Snake Eater Chronicles, which I'm so mad that you use that term because Force Recon likes to call ourselves Snake Eaters. And now we got Green Berets out there saying you guys are Snake Eaters. This is a huge problem for us.
I hate to tell you, but I think we beat you to the punch because we've been Snake Eaters since like 1952.
Oh, damn it.
I was born with a snake in my mouth. That's another story. An author, a writer once said that fiction is the way to tell the truth by other means, a figure to tell truth. And when I wrote the Special Forces Berlin book, there were things in there that I could not or did not want to mention, and to protect both myself and some of the people involved, but for security reasons and also for entertainment reasons. So what I had started to do in 1985, I said, I now have the direction and motivation to finish this. And what I used was my experiences in Europe and elsewhere to finish that first book. And it's my way of sort of telling the story of not only the individuals, because a lot of thriller fiction and espionage fiction, military thriller fiction, centers on one guy who is the most capable guy in the world, never gets killed, and can handle any emergency easily and with only a credit card and a paper
Stick of
clip.
bubble gum.
Right. Yeah. And he makes his own bubble gum from the trees that he's tapped. So I wanted to write something that was more about the team. And sometimes I manage to do that, sometimes I don't. But that's when I first started telling the stories. And then what I've done is taken the people that I've worked with and the actual historical scene that was happening at a particular time. I start out 1977 writing about what's going on in Berlin at the time. My second book takes place during the Iran hostage situation. And it goes on from there. I've even gone back now and written what I have to call the prequel, because my first book is Snake Eater 1. So now my fifth book is the Snake Eater prequel. I go back to the origins of the unit and tell the story of what it was like in Berlin in the late 50s, early 60s. And I rely on, when I wasn't there, I rely on the experiences of other people that I've heard stories from, and I can fill those in. And I try to make them as close to the truth as possible. And there's a lot of truth that is woven into the story. Those experiences that I've had happened. They might have happened, but with different people, different places, or different times, but they've happened.
I appreciate that. Well, I have been absolutely enthralled through our interview today, James. This has been absolutely fantastic. So I have three final questions for you. Just a real quick lightning round. I want to know.
Well, I have one first. Is how have you stayed awake all the time?
Are you kidding me? So, I mean, without, so we have a term in our generation, it's called like fanboying, like this is the greatest job in the world. I get to meet people who are my heroes, right? Like people like you are men that I grew up wanting to idolize or idolizing and wanting to be. And so now I get a chance to have conversations with you. And you know what? Some people say don't ever meet your heroes. I don't believe in that. I get to meet them every day when I have conversations like this. What's so fun about your story is in the beginning of the conversation, you told me that you wanted, when you joined the Army, you left college, you wanted adventure. You wanted a life of adventure. You have absolutely done that. You have done everything that a young boy could imagine he wants to do in this world, and you've done it well. And then you've written stories about it to inspire other people to press forward. And that matters even more to me. So I can't thank you enough for this, for spending time with me and I'm just making my day, through this conversation.
Right now, I'm about 2 feet off the chair. So thank you for that.
Oh man. All right. So, but my very serious, very important questions, because I'm still a little kid at heart, is I want to know my Berlin spy guide. All right. So I've got a couple of questions. If I'm going to Berlin and I want to go to 3 sites in Berlin, I've got 48 hours to be in Berlin. What are the top 3 sites in your mind that have a Cold War espionage hit that can be emotionally, not just historically, for you?
The Bridge of Spies, Klinika Brücke at Potsdam. The area around the Brandenburg Gate, to include Checkpoint Charlie and the Reichstag. And then the third one would be the headquarters of the former East German secret police, the Ministry for State Security, aka the Stasi. Those three sites I would make sure to go to.
Absolutely.
After that, I've got about 20 others, but those are the top 3.
Oh man, I appreciate that. Are there any sites in Berlin? So for question number 2 is, are there any sites in Berlin specifically that kind of give you an emotional or a memory when you step back into that location that bring you back to your time when you were there as a younger man operationally?
A lot of the sites have disappeared, unfortunately. Going to see the Bridge of Spies, which is very nicely depicted in the movie Bridge of Spies with Tom Hanks and that fantastic British actor that plays Rudolph Abel. If you go there at night, stand in the middle of the bridge, you get a very good feeling of what it would have been like to be there, especially if it's in the middle of November, December. The other place would be on Bernauer Strasse, which has a remnant of the original wall in one of the towers. And if you go there, and there are a number of things to see and do around there, including one of the underground tunnels, which they've preserved. Just go and stand next to the wall and think about what it would have been like to be on this side or that side. Because I remember doing that along that wall when it was up complete. And I remember thinking, and I've written about this in my book, or books, that it was just such a strange feeling to be in that location, knowing that this was like the front line of an existential struggle between communism and capitalism. Those are the words I use. Knowing that if you went over to the other side, that you would be under probably the most complete surveillance state in the world, or being on this side, being in the free West, and being able to go into a pub and drink a beer and read a book while you're listening to the S-Bahn, the trains going, clacking over the top of the bridge. It's just, it's an amazing thing to see or think about. I've got the experience of being there both ways. So,
oh man, it gives me chills. It really does.
I love being there. In some ways, I don't like Berlin now because it's changed. I know it's for the better, theoretically.
Yeah, sure.
But it's not like the fishbowl we used to be in.
Man, I love that. And my last moment is, you've answered all my questions there. I really appreciate it. The last thing I want to do is the same thing I do on every show. I want to give you, the guest, an opportunity to say anything that you'd like to the listeners. But I will sign off from this, and I will say James stays cool is one thing. Your name, you live up to your name. You stayed cool through thick and thin. I can't wait to have you back. And with that, sir, I'd like to turn the floor over to you.
Well, the flip side of that name is that in the original Czech, it means something along the line of curmudgeon. So, so I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Anyway, no, I love to be here and talk about it. Obviously, I'm always nervous before these things, but then when it starts happening, I just started telling stories. The last thing I would call myself is a hero. I never did anything other than serve with the government, with the Army and the agency for 35 years total. What I was privileged with was being with all these other people, the people I served with, the experiences that I had, the cultural exposure that I had around the world during all this time. So that was amazing, and I was just very privileged to experience it, and I'm also privileged to be able to talk about it to you folks.
Wow, I couldn't have said it better myself. James, thank you so much for coming on the show today. You are an example for other Americans to emulate, and I mean that. Thank you so much for everything, and I look forward to our next conversation at the release of your next book, and we will be one of the first people to be able to help promote that when we have the opportunity to do so. Thank you so much, my friend, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you for that too, AJ. Thank you very much.